The morning sun spilled through the tall, arched windows of the small courtroom in a quiet U.S. city, casting a warm golden glow across the polished wooden benches. The faint scent of polished wood mixed with the crisp aroma of freshly printed legal documents. It should have been a normal day, a routine hearing in an otherwise ordinary town. But it was. Today, a dangerous criminal faced trial, and the courtroom hummed with anticipation, tension threading through every corner like an invisible current. A 3-year-old girl, small and fragile in her pastel dress, clutched her mother's hand tightly, the tiny fingers trembling as she followed her up the steps to the courtroom. Her little shoes clicked softly against the marble, each tap echoing faintly in the high-ceilinged room. Her mother, a woman in her early 30s with kind eyes, squeezed her daughter's hand reassuringly, whispering, "It's okay, sweetie. We're just here to watch." But the girl's wide eyes reflected more than curiosity. They mirrored something deeper, a quiet awareness of the unusual energy in the room. The courtroom was already filling with murmurs. Reporters crowded near the back, cameras poised and microphones angled toward the judge's bench. Lawyers moved with purposeful energy, organizing files, whispering to one another, eyes darting occasionally toward the defendant, who sat stoically, hands cuffed, expression unreadable. Uniformed officers lined the perimeter, their boots soft against the floor, badges glinting in the sunlight. At the center of this tense tableau was the prosecutor, a man known for his meticulous approach, reviewing notes and preparing to present his case. The entire room seemed alive with anticipation. Among them sat Rex, a German Shepherd police dog, disciplined, calm, and exuding a presence that seemed to quiet the room without effort. His handler, a tall officer with a lined, serious face softened by the occasional hint of a smile, sat at the edge of the courtroom, Rex at his side. The dog's ears pricked occasionally, alert, scanning the room, body poised but relaxed. There was a subtle authority about him, a silent assurance that he had been trained for situations far more dangerous than a courtroom. The girl's gaze immediately found him. Her small eyes were wide with fascination as she whispered to her mother, "Who's that?" Her mother leaned down, whispering back, "That's a police dog, honey. He helps catch bad people and keeps people safe." The little girl's fingers twitched as if she wanted to reach out, though she knew better than to touch the dog without permission. She felt somehow that Rex was important, that he mattered in a way she could not yet articulate. The judge, a stern man with graying hair and a reputation for fairness, called the courtroom to order. His gavel echoed sharply, silencing the low hum of conversation. The trial began, and the tension became almost palpable. Every step, every whispered word seemed magnified. The little girl clutched her mother's hand even tighter, peeking over the bench in front of her to catch glimpses of the suspect, the attorneys, and of course, Rex. The defendant was accused of a series of crimes that had terrorized the community for months. The case had made headlines, with each new development increasing public attention. The courtroom was packed, not just with those directly involved in the trial, but with curious onlookers and members of the press hopping to catch a glimpse of drama. The air was heavy with anticipation, and even the subtle creak of the courtroom door seemed loud. Rex remained calm, a silent sentinel amid the chaos. The girl couldn't take her eyes off him. She tilted her head, studying the dog's strong, lean body, the way he sat so perfectly still, yet alert. He seemed to understand more than anyone else in the room, and she felt an unspoken connection forming. There was something about him, an aura of strength, courage, and calm, that drew her attention and held it firmly. Her mother tried to distract her with quiet words, explaining the seriousness of the trial and why everyone was gathered. But the girl's focus never wavered. She whispered again, "Mommy, he's looking at me." Her mother followed her gaze and noticed Rex's steady eyes were indeed fixed momentarily on the child. It was subtle, barely noticeable to anyone else, but the connection was real. The girl felt it instinctively, a small but undeniable sense that the dog understood her presence, that he recognized her as part of the room's unfolding story. As the prosecutor began to outline the case, the girl's mind wandered briefly to the stories she had heard about brave dogs and heroes. Rex seemed like one of those heroes, silent and strong, ready to act when needed. She didn't understand all the legal jargon, the arguments about evidence, or the implications of the trial. But she understood courage and loyalty, and she sensed that Rex embodied both. The courtroom, with all its tension and authority, became a stage for something far more profound. A story of trust, instinct, and quiet observation. The defense attorney rose, attempting to undermine the evidence, questioning the police reports and even Rex's role in the investigation. The adults argued, citing procedures, precedents, and witness statements. But the girl barely noticed the words. Her attention remained on Rex, and she could feel a strange anticipation building in the room. Something was about to happen, she knew, though she didn't understand why. It was the kind of moment that could only be recognized by someone unburdened by logic or strategy. A child, small and innocent, noticing what others could not. As the trial continued, the girl's fascination with Rex deepened. She leaned slightly forward, her tiny hand clutching her mother's sleeve, eyes never leaving the dog. He shifted slightly, just enough to acknowledge the movement, and the girl's heart fluttered. It was a connection of pure instinct, unspoken and invisible to the busy adults. And in that quiet observation, the seed of a moment that would astonish everyone was planted. The courtroom, tense with formal proceedings, seemed unaware of the drama quietly unfolding in a child's mind. The murmurs, the legal strategies, the weight of evidence, all of it would soon be reframed by something simple and profound. The little girl's innocent gaze, focused entirely on Rex, was about to alter the dynamics of the courtroom in a way no one could anticipate. The story had begun quietly, but the impact of her attention would be monumental. The gavel struck again, signaling a brief recess. Lawyers whispered urgently among themselves. Jurors shifted in their seats. Reporters exchanged quick notes, but the girl didn't notice. She was still captivated by Rex, unaware that her observations were quietly drawing attention. Even the officers in the room had begun to notice the unusual interaction between child and dog. The calmness of Rex contrasted sharply with the tension in the room, and the little girl's innocent fascination became a focal point, a quiet counterbalance to the intensity around her. By the time the recess ended, the stage was set. The adults returned to their positions, each unaware of the story about to unfold. The girl, small and unassuming, remained quietly observant. Rex sat loyally ready, and the courtroom buzzed with the same tension that had begun the morning. But everything had changed subtly. There was an anticipation in the air, an unspoken feeling that someone or something was about to shift the course of events. And the little girl, with her clear eyes and pure heart, was at the center of it all, ready to witness and unknowingly to act. Rex, the German shepherd, sat beside his handler with the kind of discipline that only years of training could produce. His coat gleamed under the soft courtroom lights, each muscle coiled in readiness, yet his posture radiated calm authority. The crowd barely noticed him at first, focused on the legal arguments and the intimidating presence of officers and attorneys. But for the 3-year-old girl, his presence was magnetic. She couldn't take her eyes off him. There was something about the way he sat so perfectly still, alert yet unthreatening, that made her feel both safe and awed. The prosecutor rose to introduce Rex formally to the courtroom. His voice was steady, measured, commanding attention as he described the dog's impressive credentials. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this dog is more than a K-9 partner. Rex has been trained for years in search and rescue, tracking dangerous suspects and locating missing children. His skill and loyalty have saved lives more times than we can count." He gestured to the dog, who remained perfectly composed, as though understanding the weight of the words being spoken. The little girl's eyes widened. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging gently on her mother's sleeve, "he helps people." Her mother smiled, whispering reassurance. "Yes, sweetheart, he helps people every day. He's very brave." The girl's tiny fingers clutched the edge of the bench as her gaze returned to Rex. There was something instinctively honest about the way he looked at her, a sense of recognition and understanding that no one else in the courtroom could perceive. Rex's handler, a tall, sturdy man with a calm demeanor, glanced down at the girl. He offered a small, approving nod. "He's gentle with kids," he whispered to her mother, "but he knows when to be serious. Today he's working with us in a very important way." The girl's lips parted in awe and she whispered softly, "He's a hero." The word felt too big for her to fully understand, but she sensed its truth. Even in her young mind, she recognized bravery and loyalty when she saw it. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted subtly. While the adults debated legal technicalities and examined documents, the child's fascination with Rex created a quiet countercurrent. The dog's calm energy seemed to seep into the room, a quiet reminder of the courage and precision behind the law enforcement effort. Officers straightened slightly, noting how even a toddler seemed to sense Rex's importance. Lawyers adjusted their postures, realizing that while the trial was formal, the presence of this remarkable dog added a humanizing, emotional element they couldn't ignore. As the trial continued, the prosecutor began recounting how Rex had played a critical role in the case. He described the night when the suspect attempted to flee through a dense, wooded area. Rex, trained to track scent, had located footprints and traces invisible to human eyes. He had led officers to the suspect's hideout, where crucial evidence had been recovered. The courtroom listened, rapt. The jurors shifted slightly in their seats, imagining a dog navigating the dark woods, relentless and precise, accomplishing what humans alone could not. The girl's eyes sparkled with curiosity. She leaned closer to her mother, whispering, "He's amazing." Her mother nodded quietly, unsure whether to laugh or marvel at her daughter's intuitive grasp of Rex's abilities. She noticed the girl's fascination had grown into something deeper, a connection, almost magical, between child and dog. While adults focused on the legal details, the girl saw something else: courage, loyalty, and the quiet power of observation. Rex's training history was next, presented with photographs and documentation. Images of him locating missing children, apprehending suspects, and participating in emergency rescues flashed across the courtroom monitor. Each image seemed to command attention, telling a story of bravery and unwavering commitment. The girl's small hand reached unconsciously toward the screen, as if she wanted to touch the hero in the photos. Her mother whispered, "See, that's him helping people. That's why he's important." Even the judge, stern and composed, allowed a momentary softening. The photographs reminded him in an unexpected way that justice was more than rules and procedure. It was about lives, safety, and the courage of those who protect others. The courtroom's energy subtly shifted from tension to awe. Jurors exchanged glances, perhaps unconsciously influenced by the story Rex's presence told, not in words but in posture, discipline, and silent vigilance. The girl's fascination deepened when the prosecutor described the final pursuit. The suspect had tried to escape through a maze of alleyways and abandoned buildings, leaving a trail that could have gone cold in minutes. Rex, guided only by scent, navigated the obstacles flawlessly. The handler had described how the dog paused, assessing each movement, listening for sounds humans couldn't hear. Then, with precision and calm determination, Rex led the officers directly to the suspect. The room held its breath as the prosecutor recounted the moment the suspect was caught. The girl whispered, "He's smart too." Her mother's eyes widened. Indeed, Rex's intelligence was extraordinary, the combination of instinct, training, and loyalty making him a true hero. The little girl's understanding, though simple, was profound. She sensed that this dog wasn't just following orders. He was making choices, observing, and acting when it mattered most. And she understood instinctively that this mattered in the courtroom as much as it mattered in the field. Rex shifted slightly, acknowledging a subtle movement from the girl. It was a gesture so small that most adults missed it, but she noticed. Her heart fluttered in delight. The dog, the silent hero of countless missions, had acknowledged her presence. It was a quiet, unspoken bond, one that transcended words. The courtroom continued to murmur with proceedings, but for the girl a story was unfolding, a story of courage, loyalty, and connection that no adult argument could diminish. The defense attorney attempted to downplay Rex's role, questioning the validity of canine-assisted evidence. Adults debated technicalities, citing rules and precedents, but the girl's gaze never left Rex. In her mind, the dog's actions spoke louder than arguments. She sensed the truth, unfiltered and clear. To her, Rex was not just part of a trial. He was a living, breathing hero, capable of understanding right from wrong, capable of helping others in ways she could admire but never replicate. The judge's voice echoed again, calling for order. Lawyers adjusted their papers, officers shifted their stance, and the jury leaned forward. But in the center of it all, the girl's attention remained unwavering. Rex, calm and vigilant, continued to scan the room, alert but serene. The subtle tension in the air seemed to bend around them, as if the presence of innocence and heroism together could reshape the energy of the courtroom itself. As the morning stretched into early afternoon, the girl's fascination only grew. She whispered questions to her mother about Rex's work, about the brave things he had done, and about how he knew when to act. Her mother answered gently, smiling at her daughter's curiosity, aware that something extraordinary was quietly unfolding. The adults may have been focused on evidence, legal strategy, and precedent, but the little girl and the dog were engaged in a silent conversation of understanding and admiration, a connection that would soon play a pivotal role in the trial's outcome. By the time the recess was called, the courtroom had subtly shifted. Adults whispered among themselves, noticing the girl's unbroken attention to Rex, the way he occasionally acknowledged her presence, and the calm authority that seemed to radiate from him. It was an unusual dynamic, impossible to articulate fully, yet everyone in the room felt it. Something extraordinary was quietly building, a moment of truth waiting to erupt. And at the heart of it were two unlikely witnesses, a tiny girl with wide, curious eyes and a German shepherd whose presence commanded respect and inspired awe. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was trained on the proceedings, yet the focus shifted imperceptibly toward Rex, the German shepherd who sat perfectly still beside his handler. His calm, watchful eyes scanned the room, alert for any sign of danger, yet never aggressive. The 3-year-old girl, still clutching her mother's hand, couldn't tear her gaze away. There was something about him that captivated her, his poise, his silent authority, and the sense that he knew more than the adults in the room ever could. The defense attorney rose again, attempting to undermine Rex's contribution to the case. "Your Honor," he said, voice sharp, "the testimony regarding this K9's actions is circumstantial. How can we rely on a dog's instinct as evidence in a court of law?" He paced slowly before the jury, gesturing at the German shepherd. The adults in the room nodded gravely, taking notes, whispering to one another. But the little girl, oblivious to legal jargon, felt only intrigue. She tilted her head, studying Rex's ears as they twitched at every word, his eyes unblinking, steady. The jury shifted in their seats, some frowning, some leaning forward trying to interpret the layers of evidence and argument. The prosecutor responded, calm but firm, explaining how Rex had tracked the suspect through dense woods and rough terrain, recovering critical evidence that human officers might have missed. "Rex is not just a dog," he said. "He is trained, observant, and reliable. He made the difference in locating the suspect when all else failed." The girl's eyes sparkled. She whispered to her mother, "He's helping everyone, isn't he?" Her mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair from the child's face. "Yes, honey, he's very brave and he helps people who can't help themselves." The girl's gaze remained locked on Rex, and for a fleeting moment she felt as if they shared a private understanding, a silent acknowledgement that transcended words. Rex's calm, unshakable presence contrasted sharply with the tension and urgency of the courtroom, and the girl's focus made the dog seem even more remarkable. As the defense continued to question the reliability of Rex's role, the little girl fidgeted in her seat. She pressed her tiny fingers into the fabric of her dress, leaning slightly forward to watch him. Rex's ears twitched again, his gaze settling momentarily on her, a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The child's heart fluttered at the connection. She didn't understand everything being said, but she recognized truth and courage when she saw it. The courtroom, filled with complex arguments, legal maneuvering, and adult tension, seemed to fade into the background. All that mattered was the bond forming quietly between the girl and the dog. Outside, reporters murmured about the unusual sight of the toddler so intently focused on a police dog. Some whispered, "Is she really paying attention?" Others laughed softly, nodding that children often notice things adults overlook. But inside the courtroom, the significance of her gaze went unnoticed by most, though a few officers and jurors sensed the silent story unfolding, a story of instinct, attention, and courage. The judge adjusted his glasses, peering down at the girl and Rex. "Court is adjourned for a brief recess," he said, gavel striking the bench with authority. Lawyers shuffled their papers, murmuring among themselves while the jury filed out slowly. Yet even in the brief pause, the girl's attention never wavered. She leaned closer to her mother, whispering, "He's looking at me again." Her mother followed her gaze and noticed Rex's head tilt ever so slightly, a subtle acknowledgement. A shiver of anticipation ran down the girl's spine. Something extraordinary was about to happen, though no one else realized it yet. The prosecutor motioned for Rex to remain seated, observing quietly, while officers stretched their legs in the brief respite. The little girl whispered more questions about the dog, how he knew what to do, how he could find the suspect, and why he wasn't barking or running. Her mother answered patiently, "He's trained to be calm and smart, honey. That's why he's so special." The girl's fascination deepened, her imagination painting heroic scenes of Rex navigating dark alleys, rescuing frightened children, and guiding officers with precise instincts. The defense attorney tried again, this time presenting expert testimony challenging Rex's accuracy. Charts, graphs, and scent tracking data were displayed on monitors. Lawyers debated the weight of canine evidence, raising doubts, questioning methodology, and attempting to create uncertainty. The judge listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes, but the girl barely noticed the words. Her eyes stayed fixed on Rex. She sensed with a clarity beyond logic that the dog was trustworthy, heroic, and unwavering. The room, tense with debate and technicalities, contrasted sharply with the child's innocent certainty. As the trial resumed, the atmosphere thickened. Jurors leaned forward, absorbing every word of the arguments. The girl's small frame trembled slightly, a mixture of anticipation and excitement. She whispered again to her mother, "I think he knows something." Her mother smiled gently but remained silent, sensing that the child's intuition, though simple, was uncannily perceptive. The room seemed to pulse with quiet suspense. The adults focused on evidence and procedure, yet the real story was forming subtly in the eyes of a child watching a dog. Rex shifted slightly, sitting taller, scanning the room as though acknowledging the stakes of the moment. The little girl's gaze never wavered. She felt an inexplicable understanding, a certainty that this dog's presence mattered more than anyone could articulate. There was a hero in the room, yes, but more than that, there was a witness, a silent, observant partner in justice who would soon alter the course of the trial in a way no one anticipated. Time seemed to stretch. The courtroom held a delicate balance of tension and focus. Lawyers argued, witnesses testified, and officers observed quietly, but the girl's connection with Rex added a layer of unseen energy. Each subtle gesture from the dog, the twitch of an ear, the flick of a tail, the tilt of his head, felt monumental to her. She leaned forward, her heart racing, whispering, "He's going to do something, I just know it." Her mother, touched by the child's conviction, whispered reassurance but knew instinctively that the moment was approaching. The judge called for the next witness, a law enforcement officer involved in the case. The witness detailed how Rex had tracked the suspect over uneven terrain, through forests and backyards, locating key evidence that ultimately led to an arrest. The jurors listened, rapt. The girl's eyes grew wider, absorbing every detail with fascination. "He's so smart," she whispered. The mother squeezed her hand, realizing her daughter's quiet observation was more than curiosity. It was an intuitive understanding of the dog's extraordinary capabilities. The courtroom murmured with tension. The defense questioned the officer, attempting to discredit Rex's performance, but the child's attention never wavered. She leaned slightly closer, fingers entwined with her mother's, eyes fixed on the German shepherd. The dog's gaze occasionally met hers, a subtle acknowledgement that made the little girl's heart pound. She felt somehow that he understood her role as a witness of truth, even if she couldn't yet articulate it. The energy in the room shifted imperceptibly, tension now laced with anticipation and awe. By mid-afternoon, the trial had reached a critical point. Evidence was stacked, testimonies recorded, and arguments made. The jurors were tense, scribbling notes, whispering quietly among themselves. The girl remained focused on Rex, and the bond between them, though silent and subtle, grew stronger with each passing moment. She felt that something important was about to happen, something beyond adult logic, strategy, or argument. She didn't know how or why, but her heart knew. The story of courage and justice was about to pivot. Rex's handler adjusted his posture, subtly signaling to the dog to remain calm. The little girl leaned forward again, whispering, "I think he's going to help now." The mother looked down at her daughter, smiling softly, sensing the growing significance of the moment. Even the judge, stern and formal, noticed the unusual quiet in the room, the way attention seemed to focus on the dog and the child in ways that defied expectation. It was then that the subtle, extraordinary tension reached its peak. The child's gaze locked on Rex. The dog's eyes met hers for a heartbeat longer than before. Something unspoken passed between them. In that instant, the courtroom, the judge, jury, attorneys, officers, and spectators, were unaware that a small but pivotal moment was about to unfold. A child, guided by instinct, and a dog, guided by courage and loyalty, were poised to change everything in the most extraordinary way. The courtroom was silent, the kind of tense silence that comes when every person present senses something extraordinary is about to happen. Lawyers shuffled papers nervously, jurors leaned forward in their seats, and officers adjusted their stances, all eyes alternating between the attorneys, the suspect, and Rex, the German shepherd sitting loyally beside his handler. The little girl remained in her seat, clutching her mother's hand, her wide eyes fixed entirely on Rex. Her heart raced, not out of fear, but from a sense of anticipation she could not explain. For weeks, the courtroom had been a stage of formalities, rules, and adult reasoning. Evidence had been presented, testimonies had been heard, and arguments had stretched across hours of legal scrutiny. Yet all of it had failed to capture the pure clarity of truth that a child could recognize in an instant. And now, sitting small and quiet, the girl's instincts were reaching a crescendo. She felt without reasoning that something needed to be said, and that she knew exactly what it was. The prosecutor called for Rex to demonstrate his part in the case, asking the handler to recount the final moments of the suspect's apprehension. The officer stood, adjusting his hat and straightening his posture. Rex tracked the suspect through dense foliage, he explained, voice firm but calm, navigating terrain humans could not easily traverse. When we arrived at the location where the suspect was hiding, Rex signaled us, as trained, allowing us to make the arrest safely and effectively. Without Rex, this suspect could have escaped. He is a vital witness, though he cannot speak in words. The words were measured, precise, yet the courtroom remained tense. The defense attorney's eyes narrowed, ready to question every detail, every interpretation of the dog's actions. "Your Honor," he said, "the evidence provided by a dog, no matter how trained, is not conclusive. It is subject to error, misinterpretation, and bias. We cannot base a verdict solely on a K9's behavior." His voice carried confidence, authority, and the rigid certainty of the legal mind. Yet no amount of argument could shake the quiet truth that the little girl now perceived. She leaned slightly forward, her tiny finger twitching as her focus on Rex intensified. Her gaze followed the subtle movements of his ears, the tilt of his head, the way his eyes locked briefly on hers. There was a connection, silent and powerful, that no one in the courtroom could see but her. The adults debated evidence, but she understood instinctively. She felt the truth in her bones. She knew the dog had done exactly what his handler had described. And she felt a growing certainty that her observation could, and would, matter. The prosecutor paused, noticing the girl's intense focus. He allowed a small smile to flicker, aware of her fascination, though unsure what it meant. Officers shifted, whispering quietly among themselves, sensing a subtle tension they could not fully explain. Even the judge noticed the child's unbroken attention, a stark contrast to the formal demeanor of the courtroom. Something was about to unfold, a moment so simple and pure it would cut through all strategy, procedure, and skepticism. The little girl's mother whispered softly, trying to soothe her, "It's okay, honey, just watch." But the girl was not watching. She was seeing. She saw Rex not as a dog, not as evidence, but as a hero in motion, a being of clarity and truth. The connection was almost electric, a silent understanding passing between them. And then, in a heartbeat, she made her move. Her tiny finger shot out, pointing directly at Rex. "He did," she exclaimed, her voice clear and confident, resonating through the courtroom with a power that belied her age. Time seemed to freeze. The gavel hovered in midair as the judge paused mid-sentence. Gasps erupted across the room. Jurors leaned forward, eyes wide, whispering to one another in shock. The defense attorney froze mid-gesture, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The prosecutor's jaw dropped, a mixture of astonishment and awe flashing across his face. Even the officers seemed momentarily stunned, unaccustomed to a child speaking so decisively in the middle of a high-stakes courtroom drama. Rex's handler knelt briefly, giving the girl a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The German shepherd's eyes met hers, calm yet filled with something almost human, recognition. The bond between child and dog, invisible to most of the courtroom, had been affirmed in a single, powerful instant. The simplicity of her words, 2 words, so small and yet so profound, carried a weight that no legal argument could match. He did. The truth had been spoken. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled frantically, capturing the moment for their notes. Jurors whispered, leaning toward one another, trying to process the child's statement. Even the judge allowed a small, incredulous smile, realizing that sometimes truth arrives in forms that defy logic and expectation. The defense attorney sputtered, trying to find a way to respond, but the words seemed to hang, intangible yet undeniable. The child had spoken what everyone present instinctively felt, but could not articulate with authority. The mother squeezed her daughter's hand, heart pounding with pride. "You were right," she whispered softly, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's face. The girl's lips curved in a tiny, shy smile, unaware of the magnitude of her declaration. For her it was simple, instinctive, a recognition of courage, loyalty, and truth. But for the adults it was extraordinary. Outside the courtroom, whispers spread rapidly. The story of the 3-year-old girl and the police dog began to ripple across the courthouse, reaching every hallway and every office. Officers shared incredulous glances. Reporters speculated, their pens flying across notebooks. The simplicity of her observation, a child recognizing a hero, was more impactful than any technical argument or piece of evidence. It reminded everyone that sometimes, truth is not a matter of legal procedure, but of perception and instinct. Inside, Rex remained calm, his ears twitching slightly at the murmurs around him. He seemed to understand the significance of the moment, his gaze returning briefly to the little girl. The connection between them, silent yet undeniable, radiated across the room in a subtle way that shifted the energy. Adults who had been focused on the minutiae of legal procedure now felt a different force at play, the undeniable, intuitive recognition of courage and truth. The judge cleared his throat, restoring order. "Court, please return to your seats," he said, his voice steady but tinged with wonder. The jurors complied, glancing at the girl and Rex as they took their places. The defense attorney tried to regain control, but the room had changed. The child's 2 words had reframed the entire atmosphere. The truth was no longer abstract or theoretical. It had been spoken, witnessed, and recognized in its purest form. The prosecutor allowed a small, private smile, nodding the girl's role in highlighting what Rex had done. He returned to presenting evidence, now with renewed confidence, while the jurors absorbed every detail with a heightened sense of awareness. The subtle shift had already taken place. Innocence and instinct had pierced through skepticism and argument, leaving a courtroom forever altered. The little girl returned to her mother's side, still pointing occasionally at Rex, as if to reaffirm the truth she had declared. The mother whispered reassurance, proud and amazed, aware that her daughter had become a small but pivotal witness in a high-stakes trial. Rex's presence, calm and commanding, reinforced the weight of her observation. Together, they had created a moment that would be remembered long after the gavel struck and the trial concluded. By the time the recess was called, the courtroom buzzed with quiet astonishment. Whispers circulated, jurors exchanged glances, and reporters scribbled furiously. The little girl, unaware of the storm she had caused, smiled faintly, still captivated by Rex. The German shepherd, loyal and composed, remained at his handler's side, as though aware of the bond they had just shared. In the tension-filled space of a courtroom dominated by procedure and legal strategy, a child's innocence had spoken truth louder than any argument. It was a moment of clarity, untainted by bias or expectation. The girl had seen what adults could not: courage, loyalty, and the undeniable proof of heroism in action, and the room had paused to recognize it. In that instant, the course of the trial had subtly shifted. A 3-year-old girl and a police dog had changed everything. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath after the little girl's declaration. "He did." The two simple words hung in the air like a gavel strike, reverberating far beyond their sound. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, pens hovered over notes, and jurors blinked, processing the weight of what had just occurred. The defense attorney's confident posture wavered, his carefully constructed arguments suddenly dwarfed by the clarity of a child's observation. The prosecutor, though initially startled, felt a surge of validation. The simple, instinctive truth of the girl's statement cut through hours of debate, data, and speculation. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Jurors exchanged astonished glances, some leaning closer to one another, mouths slightly agape. A few reporters scribbled furiously in notebooks, trying to capture the surreal mix of innocence, courage, and legal drama unfolding before them. The atmosphere shifted. The courtroom was no longer just a venue of arguments and testimony. It had become a stage where instinct and bravery took center stage. Every adult present sensed that something extraordinary had occurred, though no one could fully articulate it. The mother squeezed her daughter's tiny hand, heart pounding with a mixture of pride and awe. "You were right," she whispered softly, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. The child's face lit with a faint smile, unaware of the gravity of her words. She didn't understand the full implications of what she had just done, but she knew she had noticed something adults had overlooked. Her tiny voice, so clear and confident, had become a force in a room dominated by authority, experience, and procedure. Even the judge, known for his stern demeanor and strict adherence to protocol, allowed a subtle smile to form. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the girl and Rex. There was a lesson here that no legal manual could teach. Truth often arrives in the most unexpected forms. He cleared his throat, restoring order, but his gaze lingered on the pair. Something about the child's clarity, combined with the silent strength of the German shepherd, had changed the room. Rex's handler knelt slightly, giving the girl a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The dog's ears twitched, his calm eyes meeting hers, a quiet confirmation of her perception. The bond between them, invisible to most in the courtroom, was now undeniable. Rex, the silent hero, seemed to understand the significance of the moment. His training had prepared him for dangerous missions, but nothing had prepared him, or the adults in the room, for the intuitive clarity of a child recognizing courage. The prosecutor, seizing the shift in energy, returned to presenting evidence with renewed focus. He recounted Rex's heroic actions in detail, navigating dense forests, tracking scent trails invisible to humans, and ultimately locating the suspect in an abandoned structure. Each account was accompanied by photographs, diagrams, and the testimony of officers who had worked alongside Rex in previous operations. The jury absorbed every word with heightened attention, their perception subtly influenced by the earlier moment when a child had spoken the undeniable truth. The defense attorney struggled to regain his footing. He attempted to question the reliability of Rex's actions once more, citing procedural concerns and potential for error. But the room's energy had shifted irrevocably. The jurors, still processing the child's intervention, weighed his words differently. What had seemed like theoretical debate now carried the emotional weight of observed heroism. The little girl's statement had reframed the entire courtroom dynamic, and every argument presented by the defense felt less persuasive in contrast to the instinctive truth she had voiced. Outside the courtroom, whispers spread quickly. Officers and courthouse staff retold the moment, describing the young girl pointing at Rex and declaring, "He did." Reporters from nearby news outlets jostled for position, scribbling notes, their pens moving faster than their thoughts. The story of the toddler and the German shepherd quickly gained momentum, spreading from the courthouse halls to local newsrooms. Social media buzzed with speculation and amazement. Images of the courtroom, Rex, and the child were already circulating online, capturing the imagination of readers nationwide. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable but transformed. Where there had been procedural rigidity, there was now a sense of awe and quiet reflection. The jurors leaned forward, absorbing not only the legal evidence but also the story of heroism unfolding in their presence. Witnesses spoke with more clarity, officers recounted their experiences with Rex in greater detail, and even the defense attorney's objections seemed softer, tempered by the undeniable weight of the child's observation. A tiny voice had altered the tone of the room, reminding everyone that courage and truth often transcend formal procedures. The little girl remained a silent observer, occasionally leaning forward, whispering questions to her mother. "Why does he help people?" she asked softly. "Because he's brave and smart," her mother replied, trying to maintain composure while secretly marveling at her daughter's perception. The girl's fascination mirrored the audience's growing admiration for Rex. He was no longer just a piece of evidence. He had become a symbol of loyalty, bravery, and the quiet power of action. The judge called for a brief recess, and the room buzzed with subdued energy. Jurors whispered to one another, reporters jotted notes rapidly, and lawyers reviewed their strategies with new awareness. The little girl, oblivious to the magnitude of her influence, leaned back slightly, smiling faintly at Rex. The German shepherd returned the gesture with a subtle, almost imperceptible wag of his tail. It was a small acknowledgement, but it carried weight. The courtroom had shifted from a purely legal arena to a place where instinct, observation, and courage held tangible influence. During the recess, officers approached the girl's mother quietly. "She noticed what many adults missed," one whispered, his voice a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "That child, she saw the truth." The mother nodded, overwhelmed by pride. The girl's intuition, unclouded by procedure or expectation, had become a powerful lens through which the courtroom now viewed Rex's role. In a space dominated by rules and strategy, her innocence had pierced through, illuminating the reality of heroism in its purest form. When the trial resumed, the prosecutor subtly incorporated the child's insight into his presentation. He emphasized Rex's decisive actions, the precision of his training, and the lives saved through his courage. Each word resonated differently now, carrying emotional weight amplified by the courtroom's recent events. The jurors, influenced not only by evidence but by the extraordinary observation of a 3-year-old, absorbed every detail with renewed focus. The defense's arguments, once dominant, now seemed secondary to the undeniable clarity the child had introduced. The little girl continued to watch, occasionally whispering to her mother. Her observations, innocent and unfiltered, highlighted aspects of Rex's behavior that adults had overlooked. The way he scanned the room, his patience under stress, his subtle cues to the handler. She noticed patterns, small gestures, and instincts that made her smile quietly. While adults debated theory, she saw reality. And reality in that courtroom had a hero, a dog whose loyalty, courage, and training had become undeniable through the eyes of a child. By the end of the day, the courtroom had shifted profoundly. The energy was different, lighter yet charged with awe. Witnesses spoke more clearly, jurors deliberated with subtle recognition of the child's intervention, and even the judge's demeanor had softened, a quiet acknowledgement of the extraordinary moment he had witnessed. The little girl, unassuming and shy, had created a ripple that transformed a tense legal proceeding into a moment of wonder, admiration, and clarity. As the participants filed out, reporters gathered outside, cameras ready to capture any detail, and the story of the toddler and Rex spread rapidly. Social media buzzed with incredulous excitement, shares and comments skyrocketing. Headlines formed instantly. 3-year-old points at police dog in courtroom, changes everything, and tiny witness, big impact. Girl and K9 alter court trial. The courtroom had become the stage for an extraordinary story of innocence, courage, and instinct, shared far beyond the walls where it had unfolded. The little girl, still holding her mother's hand, glanced at Rex once more. He sat calmly, watching, alert and seemingly proud. The bond between them had been affirmed, subtle but profound. A child's clear-eyed observation had validated the dog's actions, reinforced the truth of his heroism, and shifted the courtroom's perception irrevocably. In a world dominated by procedure, paperwork, and strategy, 2 innocent words had rippled outward, touching every heart in the room, transforming tension into clarity and awe into lasting respect. By the end of the day, it was clear. The little girl had changed everything, not through argument or evidence, but through instinct, observation, and courage. The courtroom, the officers, the jurors, and even the reporters had witnessed a truth no one could deny. And Rex, the silent hero, remained at her side, ready for whatever came next. Together, they had created a story that would not soon be forgotten, a story of trust, bravery, and the remarkable clarity of a child's perspective. The courtroom reconvened after the brief recess, but the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. The energy hummed with quiet astonishment. Everyone had witnessed the moment. A 3-year-old girl, small and unassuming, had pointed at Rex, the German shepherd, and declared with crystal clarity, "He did." Those 2 words had cut through hours of legal argument, piercing through doubt and skepticism, leaving a silence heavy with awe. Now all eyes, even those of the adults trained in law and procedure, were drawn to Rex. Rex remained poised, alert, and calm beside his handler. Every muscle in his strong body exuded disciplined readiness. The subtle shift in the room's energy seemed to flow directly from him. He was no longer just a trained police dog. He had become a symbol of courage, loyalty, and clarity, the living embodiment of truth. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, watching him with a newfound respect. Even the defense attorney, who had moments ago been confident and argumentative, could not ignore the silent authority the dog projected. The prosecutor seized the moment, emphasizing Rex's actions in the field with renewed conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady yet infused with intensity, "Rex is not merely a participant in this case. He is an active, trained professional whose instincts and actions have saved countless lives. On the night in question, he tracked the suspect across difficult terrain, through darkness and obstacles that would have confounded even the most experienced human officers. His actions were precise, deliberate, and heroic." The little girl leaned slightly forward, whispering to her mother, "He's so brave." Her mother smiled, her eyes misty with pride and wonder. She realized that her daughter had recognized something profound, heroism in its purest, simplest form. Where adults measured events against procedure, rules, and evidence, the child recognized courage as it was displayed in the moment. Her intuitive perception had already shifted the courtroom's dynamics, but now it seemed to ripple further, influencing even those who had previously been skeptical. Rex's handler stood to demonstrate the dog's precision in action. The officer recounted the events of that critical night. The suspect had attempted to flee through dense woods, leaving faint trails that human eyes could not detect. Rex had navigated uneven terrain, streams, and dense undergrowth, following the trail with a focus so intense that even the most experienced officers could barely keep pace. Each step was calculated, each movement deliberate. The child's eyes were wide with fascination, tracing every detail her mother narrated. The prosecutor presented photographs of the terrain, footprints, and the location where the suspect had ultimately been apprehended. The jurors leaned forward, their expressions shifting from analytical scrutiny to quiet amazement. They could almost visualize Rex moving silently through the forest, every sense alert, every instinct guiding him to the truth. The courtroom's tension, once thick with doubt and procedure, had transformed into a palpable admiration for the dog's unwavering courage. The little girl whispered again, "He knew what to do." Her mother nodded softly, understanding that her child's perception was not just innocent observation, it was insight. In the child's mind, Rex was a hero, unwavering and precise. In the room of adults, that perspective introduced a new lens through which to view the case. Where words had failed to convince, instinct had spoken, and the courtroom's energy shifted subtly but profoundly. The defense attorney attempted to counter, raising questions about the reliability of canine-assisted tracking. "Your Honor, while the dog's training is impressive, it cannot replace verified human observation. Evidence must be corroborated." Yet even as he spoke, jurors exchanged looks, some frowning, others nodding. The child's declaration, simple, clear, and instinctive, had reframed their perception. The dog's role was no longer abstract. It was real, observable, and undeniable. 2 words from a child had amplified the impact of Rex's actions, in a way legal arguments alone could not. Rex shifted slightly, his ears twitching, signaling attention. The little girl's eyes met his once more. For a heartbeat, the connection between them seemed almost magical. She did not need to understand legal procedure, courtroom hierarchy, or the nuances of evidence. She only needed to see courage, loyalty, and determination, and she recognized it instantly. Her gaze reinforced the story the prosecutor had been telling, lending a weight no human witness could match. Officers whispered quietly among themselves, impressed by the unusual dynamic. "She saw it," one said softly. "She understood before any of us could explain it." The statement wasn't meant for the courtroom at large, but it encapsulated the extraordinary nature of the moment. Innocence and instinct had validated the heroism of a trained professional, a dog whose actions had already proven vital in real-world operations. As the trial continued, Rex's handler described the final moments of apprehension. The suspect had been cornered in an abandoned structure, agitated and dangerous. Rex had signaled the exact location to the officers, remaining calm but poised for action. The precision of the dog's behavior had ensured the suspect's capture without incident, preserving safety for both officers and the surrounding community. The jurors listened intently, some shifting slightly in their seats, realizing that the evidence presented was now amplified by the undeniable demonstration of instinct and courage. The little girl's attention remained unwavering. She whispered, "He didn't even bark, he just knew." Her mother smiled softly, recognizing the clarity in her daughter's words. Rex's heroism was quiet, measured, and disciplined. It did not need spectacle. Yet, to a child who understood instinct and truth, it was unmistakable. The courtroom, now attuned to this narrative, absorbed the subtleties. The calm authority of Rex, the quiet coordination with his handler, and the life-saving precision of his actions. Even the judge, who had witnessed countless trials, allowed a faint acknowledgement of wonder. He adjusted his glasses, looking at the child and the dog. Here, in the midst of formal procedure, the simple truth of courage had been made visible. It was a reminder that law and procedure, while essential, were not the sole measures of justice. Sometimes, truth was witnessed in a glance, a gesture, a heartbeat of understanding shared between a child and a hero. The prosecutor, sensing the moment's impact, concluded his presentation of Rex's actions with a quiet yet firm declaration. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the actions of Rex were decisive. His skill, training, and instinct ensured the apprehension of a dangerous suspect while preserving lives. His courage is undeniable, his loyalty unquestionable, and the truth of his actions has been observed most clearly by the purest witness in this room. He nodded subtly at the little girl, whose wide eyes met his briefly, sparkling with pride and understanding. By the end of the day, the courtroom's energy had transformed completely. Jurors, officers, attorneys, and even reporters recognized that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A 3-year-old child and a German shepherd had together highlighted courage, loyalty, and truth in a way no evidence chart, testimony, or argument could. The ripple effect of her words, "He did," had reshaped perception, amplified the impact of Rex's actions, and subtly shifted the trial's momentum. The little girl leaned back slightly, smiling faintly at Rex. Her mother whispered, "You helped everyone today." The child, too young to grasp the full implications, only nodded, content in the knowledge that she had witnessed something remarkable. Rex, ever calm and vigilant, seemed to acknowledge her presence, a silent confirmation that she had understood the essence of his work. By the time the courtroom emptied, the story had already begun to spread outside the building. Reporters shared astonished accounts, officers recounted the extraordinary observation, and social media buzzed with the image of the toddler pointing at Rex, declaring his heroism in 2 unforgettable words. The narrative was simple yet profound. Courage and truth had been recognized, validated, and amplified by the pure insight of a child. And in the quiet, the bond between the little girl and Rex deepened. Though the courtroom had been filled with adults, procedure, and argument, it had been the child's perspective that clarified the truth. 2 innocent words had shifted the energy, refocused attention, and reminded everyone present that sometimes the most profound truths are witnessed in ways no one expects. The courtroom was electric with tension, though no one could quite pinpoint why. Hours of testimony, evidence, and argument had been presented, yet the atmosphere now carried a different charge. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it had settled over every person present. Jurors shifted in their seats, whispering softly, their pens idle as they absorbed more than legal arguments. They absorbed the story of courage and loyalty that had quietly unfolded before them. At the center of it all sat Rex, calm, disciplined, and unwavering, beside his handler, and a tiny 3-year-old girl who had changed the course of the trial with just 2 words. "He did." The defense attorney rose again, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Your Honor," he began, voice measured but slightly strained, "we must consider the procedural aspects carefully. Evidence presented by a dog, however trained, cannot be infallible. Human interpretation is necessary to validate actions. I urge the jury to weigh this carefully." But his words fell flat against the energy in the room. Jurors, still haunted by the child's declaration and the subtle authority of Rex, were no longer fully engaged by theoretical arguments. The girl's voice, small but certain, had already spoken a truth that no chart, graph, or legal brief could rival. Her observation had reframed perception, creating a lens through which courage and action were now undeniable. The defense's objections, though technically sound, seemed distant and sterile in comparison. The prosecutor seized the moment, standing with renewed conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but compelling, "we have seen Rex's actions and we have heard testimony about the suspect's attempts to evade capture. But we have also seen something rarer, a pure instinctive recognition of truth. A child, innocent and untrained in law, has observed the heroism and decisiveness of Rex and confirmed it with clarity. 2 words, 'he did,' and the truth became undeniable." The room seemed to pause, even the judge leaning slightly forward in his seat. Rex's handler gave a subtle, respectful nod, acknowledging both the girl and the prosecutor's words. The dog's calm gaze swept across the courtroom, alert yet serene, ears twitching slightly as though affirming the significance of the moment. In that quiet acknowledgement, the jurors saw the embodiment of loyalty and courage, the proof that action, not argument alone, had determined the outcome. The little girl's eyes were wide with fascination. She whispered softly to her mother, "He's the hero." Her mother smiled, unable to hide the mix of pride and awe. For the child, heroism was simple: obedience, courage, and the instinct to protect others. For the courtroom, that simplicity had become a lens of clarity. All at once, the nuances of the law felt secondary to the human, an animal truth that had quietly asserted itself. The prosecutor continued, describing Rex's tracking in detail. The suspect had fled through treacherous terrain, woods, streams, and uneven paths that would challenge even the most experienced human officers. Rex had moved with purpose, guided by training, instinct, and unwavering loyalty. The officers recounted each moment, highlighting the dog's precision and discipline. The jurors listened intently, eyes wide, absorbing the story of bravery that unfolded beyond charts, graphs, or legal interpretations. The defense attorney attempted one final challenge, citing potential inconsistencies in human recollection. "It is imperative that we rely on documented evidence," he insisted. "Emotions, perceptions, and subjective experiences cannot replace rigorous examination." But again his words faltered. The room's focus had shifted irrevocably toward Rex and the girl. Her tiny gestures, subtle observations, and instinctive understanding had created a reality the jurors could not ignore. In the child's perception, Rex's heroism was unequivocal. The dog's actions were clear. Courage was unmistakable. Truth had been spoken, validated by innocence, and observed with precision. The theoretical debate could not compete. The judge, finally rising, addressed the courtroom with an air of gravity and acknowledgement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have witnessed extraordinary events today. Evidence has been presented, testimony given, and arguments made. But beyond that, we have observed a moment of clarity that transcends technical debate. A child's observation, simple yet profound, has illuminated truth in a way that no argument could contest. Let us proceed with this understanding as we consider the next steps." The jury exchanged glances, nodding subtly. The weight of the child's declaration, combined with the undeniable authority of Rex, had shifted perception. They were no longer simply evaluating evidence. They were witnessing heroism validated by instinct, courage, and observation. The decision was no longer abstract. It was personal, emotional, and undeniable. Rex's handler stood, signaling the dog to remain calm. "He knows what to do," the handler whispered, as if confirming the dog's awareness of the courtroom's attention. Rex's ears twitched, and his gaze briefly met the little girl. In that silent exchange, the bond between child and dog deepened, a quiet yet profound acknowledgement that the truth they had witnessed together mattered. The prosecutor, sensing the courtroom's transformation, asked for a brief demonstration. Rex and his handler performed a controlled tracking exercise in the courtroom. The dog moved with precision, sniffing the air, tracing an invisible path with accuracy, and returning to his handler. The jurors, watching intently, were struck by the discipline, intelligence, and courage on display. What had previously been abstract testimony now became tangible, visible, and undeniable. The little girl clapped her hands softly, eyes shining with excitement. "He did it again," she exclaimed, pointing at Rex. Her voice carried across the courtroom, drawing smiles and quiet acknowledgement from jurors, officers, and even the judge. The simplicity of her declaration reinforced the truth. Rex's heroism was real, observable, and validated by the purest form of perception, innocent and instinctive understanding. Outside the courtroom, the story was already gaining momentum. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras flashed, and whispers spread throughout the courthouse. The child's intervention, though small in words, had enormous significance. Social media buzzed with images of her pointing at Rex. The phrase "he did" shared thousands of times, inspiring awe and admiration nationwide. The narrative was simple but powerful. Courage, loyalty, and truth recognized by innocence could change outcomes in ways adults often overlooked. Inside, the courtroom moved toward the final testimonies. The jurors, now fully attentive, listened to the last officers recount the suspect's capture, detailing the careful coordination, precision, and bravery involved. Each account, already compelling, was amplified by the child's recognition and the dog's disciplined presence. The subtle energy in the room had shifted permanently. Everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The little girl's mother whispered reassurance to her daughter, holding her hand tightly. "You helped everyone see the truth today," she said. The child nodded, eyes still fixed on Rex. She did not fully understand the implications of her words, but she had recognized what mattered most: courage, loyalty, and action that made a real difference. Her clarity had become a guiding force for the courtroom, reshaping perception and reaffirming the power of instinct and observation. As the final witnesses were dismissed, the judge addressed the courtroom once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have observed the evidence, testimony, and extraordinary events of this trial. I remind you that the law requires careful consideration, but it also recognizes truth in all its forms. You have seen actions validated by expertise, courage, and now by pure observation. Proceed with this understanding as you deliberate." The jurors filed out for deliberation, each carrying not just the evidence but the quiet, undeniable impact of the child's 2 words. "He did." The simple phrase had altered perception, illuminated heroism, and created a courtroom-wide awareness that truth can emerge in unexpected forms. Rex, calm and steadfast, remained at his handler's side, a living testament to courage and discipline. The little girl watched him, eyes wide, whispering, "He's my hero." Her mother smiled, tears glistening. In that moment, the courtroom drama, legal arguments, and suspense faded into the background. What remained was clarity, a child's observation, a dog's courage, and the unassailable truth of their bond. The turning point had arrived. The courtroom was quiet as the jury filed back in after hours of deliberation. Every seat seemed charged with anticipation. Jurors carried the weight of testimony, evidence, and now the unforgettable moment of clarity provided by the 3-year-old girl. "He did." Those 2 words had echoed in their minds, cutting through doubt, hesitation, and the procedural rigidity of the trial. The German shepherd, Rex, sat obediently beside his handler, ears alert, eyes calm yet watchful, as though he understood the significance of the moment more deeply than the adults around him. The judge adjusted his glasses, peering over the courtroom with a measured calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, "you have had the opportunity to review evidence, hear testimonies, and observe extraordinary events within this courtroom. Your responsibility now is to deliberate with fairness and integrity, considering the totality of what has been presented." He glanced briefly at the child, whose tiny fingers still clutched her mother's hand. "And you may also recall that truth comes in many forms." The jurors nodded, some glancing at Rex with newfound respect. The dog's presence was no longer auxiliary, it was central. They remembered the subtle gestures, the silent precision, and most importantly, the declaration from a child too young to understand legal nuance but old enough to recognize courage when she saw it. That innocent acknowledgement had reshaped perception and framed the entire case in a human, an animal, context that data and testimony alone could never achieve. As the deliberation began, the little girl leaned slightly toward her mother. "Do you think you'll be safe now?" she whispered. Her mother nodded reassuringly, feeling the weight of her daughter's innocence and insight. "Yes, honey, he's helped people and now the truth will be seen." The girl's eyes flicked to Rex, who sat calmly, tail resting on the floor, ears twitching at every movement. The connection between them was unspoken yet profound, a bond forged in recognition of heroism, courage, and loyalty. Back at the jury room, the adults discussed the evidence, but it was impossible to ignore the earlier courtroom events. The child's simple statement had illuminated aspects of Rex's role that were otherwise abstract. His precision, courage, and reliability were no longer theoretical. They were validated through observation that transcended adult skepticism. One juror remarked quietly, "Sometimes the simplest truth is the hardest to ignore." That child, she saw what we needed to see. The deliberations moved with a sense of inevitability. Evidence, testimony, and analysis were discussed, but the emotional and moral clarity introduced by the child's observation continued to influence perception. Her innocence had reframed understanding. Courage was real, action was undeniable, and Rex's heroism was beyond dispute. Each juror weighed the facts, but now with a lens colored by instinctive truth rather than purely analytical reasoning. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, reporters whispered among themselves, cameras ready to capture the verdict. The story of a toddler recognizing a police dog's heroism had already begun to circulate. Social media buzzed with images of the child pointing at Rex, headlines declaring, "3-year-old witness validates police dog heroism in court." And two words change everything: toddler, K9, justice. Outside the walls of the courthouse, the narrative had become one of hope, admiration, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The judge called the courtroom to order, his gavel striking the bench. "Have you reached a verdict?" he asked. The foreperson, a middle-aged man with a composed but serious expression, nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." A hush fell over the room. Everyone leaned forward. Even the child, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained quiet, clutching her mother's hand. Rex's ears twitched, his gaze fixed on the proceedings as though he too sensed the moment's importance. The foreperson continued, "On the matter before us, we find the evidence, supported by human testimony, corroborated by the actions of the police dog Rex, and validated in observation, to be sufficient to determine responsibility. We reach our verdict in accordance with justice." The judge nodded, his expression grave yet tinged with emotion. "Thank you. I acknowledge that this case has demonstrated the importance of courage, loyalty, and observation in many forms. The verdict will be read aloud." The room held its collective breath as the jury foreperson read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of all charges as presented." A mixture of relief, tension, and emotion swept through the courtroom. Officers allowed small, restrained sighs of satisfaction. The prosecutor nodded solemnly, acknowledging the careful deliberation of the jurors. And the little girl, she clapped her hands softly, eyes bright, and whispered to her mother, "He did it. He really helped." Her words, innocent and pure, mirrored the courtroom's acknowledgement of Rex's role. The judge addressed the room once more. "This verdict not only reflects the legal process but also the extraordinary contributions of all involved. We recognize that heroism comes in many forms, from officers who risk their lives, to dogs trained to protect and serve, and even to the eyes of a child who sees truth unclouded by bias." He paused, looking at Rex and the child. "Let this serve as a reminder that justice is most powerful when courage and truth are recognized, regardless of how or by whom." Rex's handler knelt briefly beside him, patting the dog's strong shoulder. The German shepherd responded with calm dignity, tail sweeping lightly across the floor. For the little girl, the moment became a personal triumph. She had seen, understood, and acknowledged heroism. The courtroom, adults steeped in procedure and legal technicalities, had listened and followed that recognition to its natural conclusion. After the formalities, the mother took her daughter's hand and led her toward Rex. "Do you want to say thank you?" she asked. The child's eyes sparkled. "Yes," she whispered, approaching the dog slowly, small hands reaching out. Rex sniffed gently, his demeanor calm and composed, tail wagging ever so slightly. The bond between them, subtle but profound, had been cemented by shared recognition of courage and truth. Reporters and officers observed quietly, understanding that this small moment of connection symbolized far more than the trial itself. It represented the extraordinary impact of observation, instinct, and loyalty. The child's clarity had not only validated Rex's actions, but had reshaped the courtroom's energy, ensuring that heroism was recognized in its purest form. Outside the courthouse, the story quickly became national news. Headlines celebrated the child's perceptiveness and Rex's heroism. Social media users shared images, articles, and videos, celebrating the bond between humans and animals and the remarkable clarity of a child's observation. Comments poured in. "Innocence sees what adults overlook." A child and a dog reminding us of the meaning of courage. Justice isn't just law, it's awareness and recognition of truth. As the crowd outside applauded quietly, the little girl looked at Rex, smiling. "You helped everyone today," she said softly. Rex tilted his head, ears perked as though acknowledging her words. Her mother knelt beside her, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, you saw the truth and it changed everything." Back inside the courtroom, officers shook hands, lawyers nodded respectfully, and the judge allowed a small smile. The day had been extraordinary, not for dramatic legal maneuvers, but for the way courage, loyalty, and instinct had guided the proceedings. A child and a dog had reminded everyone that truth and heroism could be simple, observable, and undeniable. The little girl's mother scooped her up, whispering words of pride. The child glanced at Rex one last time before leaving the courthouse. There was a bond, silent but eternal, that transcended words. She had seen courage and loyalty in action, and Rex had been the living embodiment of those virtues. Together, they had altered a courtroom, a trial, and the perception of everyone present. As they walked away, the headlines continued to spread. Officers recounted the story for years to come, and the courtroom retained a quiet sense of awe. Justice had been served, but it had been enriched by recognition, instinct, and innocence. A child's observation, a dog's heroism, and the unwavering dedication of officers had combined to create a story that would be remembered long after the gavel fell. And in the quiet moments afterward, when the courtroom was empty, the little girl whispered once more to her mother, "He's my hero." And Rex, loyal and steadfast, remained the silent, dignified hero of a story that was far more than law. It was about courage, truth, and the extraordinary bonds that connect us.